Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. It's me, Jagger, and I'm just doing a solo show with Jeff. We are continuing with our positional tiers. We're going to talk tight ends. We don't have Andrew Cooper with us like we did last time, so we should stay out of the trenches. We should stay out of the deep cuts, and we'll we'll keep it just with the hits. We'll start right away with with our tier one. Obviously, we have Sam LaPorta, Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, Kyle Pitts. We talked a little bit before I hit the record button that people are getting a bit silly with Dalton Kincaid. Obviously, we think that I think he's the wide receiver one. I don't understand why people have the vision that they do with tight ends because like again when you talk to any of the tight end experts the apex for tight ends are different and like you said like I guess you could tell the crowd didn't Dalton Kincaid break some records.
Yeah, I mean, he is the franchise leader for tight ends in Bills history for receptions. His, I think it was 74 receptions was the fourth most in NFL history for a tight end. So, I mean, he was incredibly productive, and I don't think people realize just how productive he was. I actually had a spotlight that just came out, hit the website about Dalton Kincaid, and really kind of diving into the way that the Joe Brady offense functions and allows him to open up. They do a lot of different things with motion and shifting defenses one direction and then kind of working Kincaid off the backside as the primary receiver in the sets, those types of things. There's just a lot to his profile that I don't think people realize. And kind of when you flash back, I mean, I know USC couldn't cover anybody, but if you watch his USC tape in the Utah game, that was coach teaching tape when it comes to being a receiving tight end. And is kind of, you look at the athletic profile, the way he's built, he fits very, very similar to Sam LaPorta, very similar to Brock Bowers. He's in that same type of build where he's a 6'3", 6'4", 245 type receiver that is really just kind of a big slot. And I think that the expectation that I've seen some pushback on Dawson Knox, and I think that the Bills tried to make Dawson Knox happen, and they kind of approached it now as he's going to be the inline player, and Kincaid is going to be the big slot, and he's going to be the primary in this offense.
Yeah. And as someone like Sam LaPorta, I know people start to bring up like his touchdowns, but touchdowns are a lot stickier for tight ends than they are for a wide receiver because that's that's where tight ends live. That's where they eat the most is that they're catching tight ends, especially in the offense like Detroit. I don't think there's a reason to overthink him as the or as the tight end one right now. Do you?
No, I don't think so. And I think that when you talk about tight ends, like you just have to understand the way that NFL offenses are moving towards really two tight end base sets. And the Lions are interesting because the Lions didn't do it like other teams. They used a lot of extra sixth offensive linemen and a lot of that type of stuff to kind of be that blocking tight end to allow a lot of unbalanced sets where they would move Penny Sewell to the other side and then kind of have you work LaPorta off of that and really kind of just really like Kincaid, use him as a big slot receiver within their offensive scheme. And, I think when you look at the Lions offense, it's easy to have questions of who's going to be the third receiver on the depth chart, but it's really LaPorta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like to me, the role of Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam LaPorta and even Jahmyr Gibbs are solidified. It's just the wild card is Jamison Williams and who's gonna live out and the X and Z consistently. But before we move on to our next tier, I guess it'll be fill out the rest of the tier. It's Kyle Pitts, guys, and Trey McBride. Shocker. So now we'll move on. I'll invite you guys to like and subscribe, like literally every YouTuber has ever done, and I do on every episode. Hit that like button and subscribe. But more importantly, go over to footballguys.com/plans if you want to read the wonderful articles that Jeff has. Like he just said, he has a profile on Dalton Kincaid. He's got another one coming out on Deontay Johnson. If you really want to get an edge over your league mates, becoming a premium subscriber, it's crucial, guys, because moreover, we've got some fun tools coming up and we get to test those out tomorrow. So if you want to get ahead of a game, make sure you head over to footballguys.com and subscribe. Now we move over to tier two, and we've only got two in this tier. And when you only have two people doing this, it it kind of kills a little bit of variance in there. And a lot of people think this is blasphemous, but Mark Andrews and Brock Bowers are out of our top tier. For me, with Brock Bowers, it's nothing about the prospect. It's just I don't know when the Raiders are going to get a quarterback anytime soon, and that scares me. But with Mark Andrews, I still think he's going to be a top target. Really, just the other guys are just a bit younger for me, and that's what's doing it. Is that the same for you with Mark Andrews, or it's the age thing, and you think that like, do you still think you got 2 or 3 years with him being a top target, being at least a tight end one? By tight end one, I mean
Well,
a top five. That's what tight end one means.
they're outside of your top tier, to be clear, because they're inside my top tier. So
Okay.
no, I do kind of put Bowers and Andrews, grouping them with the other tight ends. And we were talking pre-show that if I'm in a startup and I get like Andrews and Bowers, Pitts, that's kind of my cutoff. That if I get one of those players, I feel really good about my tight end room or above them. And if I don't, then that's where you have to make the decision on, are you going to take an older player at tight end to kind of patch this over for a little bit, or are you going to roll the dice and maybe play some of these later younger players and kind of wait for a player to pop up and kind of fill into that slot? But I think that really kind of when you look at the Devy landscape, like I don't really know what's coming at tight end after Brock Bowers, and so that's where Bowers and Andrews kind of solidify that value for me. There's no real top player next year coming into the tight end position. I mean, maybe Aranda Gadsden Jr. gets there, but that's kind of, it's a big question mark when it comes to the tight end position, and so that's where I kind of value Bowers, Andrews, Pitts, kind of similarly to that rest of that top tier.
And I guess why I have them outside for me is that with the other four guys, I know I'm comfortable for other years. Brock Bowers, I have questions about the Raiders. Mark Andrews is just a little bit older, so like I said, really I'm just breaking this up for the sake that we tight end is a little bit closer than the other position. With that being said, does the Raiders offense has to worry you a little bit about Brock Bowers, right? Just as a whole. Like I know that we could think that he's that good, but there's still Devontae there. There's still Jacoby Myers there. There's still Michael Mayer there. Um, I feel good with him holding his dynasty value, but actually being a competitive team, I think that we're looking closer to a Kyle Pitts again than we are getting, let's say, a Sam LaPorta.
How long do you think Devontae Adams is going to be a Raider?
I don't know. That's a great question, but right now I can't. I'm not willing to bet on it. Like I'm not willing to bet on it. And just I don't know. Like you've been on vacation, so I doubt you've watched receiver or anything yet. But at least from that, he seemed a lot more dedicated than he did ahead of. Well, I mean, once they did the coaching change. But again, that's just us seeing a Netflix documentary. That's not us seeing what's actually going on. And there's a lot of smoke around him going to the Jets. But like until I see him request a trade, I'm not. I think he's going to be a Raider. So I don't know.
Yeah, I get that, but I think that for the majority of Brock Bowers' career, I don't know that he's going to be a consideration. And I understand like hesitation there, but to let you a little bit behind the curtain, that's actually the spotlight that I'm working on now is Brock Bowers, and so that's probably going to be my next article that I have ready. So I'm still learning myself and kind of figuring out myself where I really feel like Brock Bowers fits within this offense. But I'm bullish. I think that he's going to be the slot receiver, so to say. I think that there's going to be Michael Mayer. I like the talent on Michael Mayer. I don't really think he's going to be a factor in the offense. And I think there's going to be a lot of potential for, especially if it's Gardner Minshew, I feel a little bit better there than Aiden O'Connell on. We've seen Minshew hyper target and make receivers fantasy relevant. I think there's a path there for Bowers, especially at tight end, that the ability to reach fantasy relevance is a lot lower than trying to be a wide receiver one.
Yeah. And another reason too is just trade value. If you really think about like with Brock Bowers, that holds it down for me is like I'm willing to take him as like a top 5 guy, top 6 guy, comfortably in a startup. But trading for him, I feel like I'm going to be able to get him cheaper in season than I am trading for him straight up. Whereas the guys like Mark Andrews, Pitts, McBride, and up, I'm willing to pay that premium now. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to tier three at this point. And we have George Kittle, Travis Kelce, and Evan Engram. This is kind of my favorite tier, even though I don't feel great. Let's say, like, I'm not disappointed when I gotta take Brock Powers or Mark Andrews if I get sniped or whatever. But if I miss out then on Brock Powers or Mark Andrews and George Kittle, officially, you know, given up a lot of upside at that point. And George Kittle is kind of a high variance player, but he's someone that I've been more bullish on and started buying him. If you like Travis Kelce, I think that George Kittle is the same talent as Travis Kelce. He's just in a different offense, and he's like 5 years younger. So if anything, George Kittle could easily move up to tier two if he has a full healthy season. And you think about last year, he only missed two games. So like with the longer age apex of tight ends, is George Kittle really old or is he just still in his prime?
I'd say he's in his prime. And we talked on the receiver episode of if an Brandon Ayuk trade did happen, that I think a lot of people are looking at Ricky Pearsall as the primary beneficiary. I mean, maybe you can make the argument that George Kittle is the primary beneficiary if Ayuk is no longer on the roster and Kittle works his way up the pecking order on receiver targets again, and they bring maybe Pearsall along slower. So I think that there's a significant path because when you look at what Kittle was able to do last year, his efficiency was off the boards and his volume really wasn't there relative to some of the other top tight ends. If those things match, if the volume increases because of something that might happen, like an Ayuk trade, and the efficiency maintains, I mean, then you have a player that is potentially breaking fantasy leagues and is in the conversation to be the overall tight end one in redraft leagues.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And like he's a no-brainer and I'm even been willing to tear down. Like let's say and this is real because I have those rosters. If you've got two of the top four guys or top five guys, you could tear down to George Kittle. And if you could get George Kittle for anything, it's probably a net gain. As long as it's not like a fourth. If you get Kittle in a second, that's a win. If you get Kittle in another like a depth piece, it's probably a win as long as it's not like Gabe Davis or something like that. So he's someone that I really like. You've heard us talk about Evan Engram on here a lot, guys. I know I've heard that his targets have to come down because of Brian Thomas Jr. As someone who does projections, Jeff, is this mental gymnastics or is there a real possibility that increased touchdown and usage in a more efficient offense would make up for less targets for Evan Engram and he's probably still appropriate?
When I do projections, I kind of look at it as the top guys eat first and then kind of fill things in after that. And I view Evan Engram as the top guy or one of the top guys in that offense. And so I mean, maybe I scale him back a little bit because of Brian Thomas Jr., but not significantly. I think that there's still a very real path to volume for him. And I think that you saw the breakout. Really, it was the kind of the second half of last year that breakout really occurred. And I think that Trevor Lawrence is very comfortable with him, using him there. That Doug Peterson offense has traditionally used the tight end. When you go back to Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, those players in Philadelphia. So I'm not overly concerned on Engram as the player that's going to miss out. I mean, I'd be more concerned that Christian Kirk might be the player that misses out than Engram when you really, if you're going to factor Brian Thomas into there. But again, I mean, they're losing Calvin Ridley. There's a lot of room there for a player like Thomas and Gabe Davis, whoever it might be, to step in, and Evan Engram to not be really down at all.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. Like, if anything, the Christian Kirk has the most to lose, but I just think that there's people forget that there's just so much meat left on the board for the offense as a whole. So
Yeah.
arguably, I think our three of Evan Ingram can do the same, but Brian Thomas Jr. and Christian Kirk can have like still great seasons. Like we forget that Trevor Lawrence is pretty good. He had a couple of bad stretches towards the end there, but again, I think that a lot of that was injury, and a lot of that is that their biggest problem is offensive line, just getting their offensive line together. It's not so much the skill positions. So we'll move on to our tier 4, and we'll spend a little bit more time on this tier because I think it's where it gets interesting. We talked briefly about T.J. Hockenson, and then we have David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, and then Pat Freiermuth. T.J. Hockenson, we talked a little bit backstage. I don't think people are counting that he could miss a significant amount of time. And I'm not saying that he's still young. I think he's 27 years old. I think he's still going to have productive years, still have tight end 1 years, but his redraft value should greatly impact his dynasty value. So, Jeff, do you think that how thin tight end and shallow tight end is in comparison to the rest of the positions is the reason why TJ could still hold this value? Or do you think that you should be taking someone like Njoku or Freiermuth over Hockenson at this point?
I mean, relative at cost, getting those players later. If I knew I was going to get those players later in a startup type situation, then I would prefer those players later. It's kind of, you reach that scenario where you're looking at 8 tight ends off the board and who's left. And that's, I think Hockenson kind of stands out maybe a little bit there. When you look at, he did have some very, very strong production. And I'd say my concern might be less the expectation on this time and more how much he was inflated because of how much that offense passed with Kirk Cousins, and what's that offense going to look like without that passing volume? Because I think that passing volume was able to keep him as an elite tight end producer and also allow Jordan Addison to hit and allow Justin Jefferson to be the number 1 receiver in fantasy football. And if they're a little bit more of a balanced offense, JJ McCarthy coming in there potentially, if they defer to the run more, that's where my bigger concern is, if they're going to get up to those passing volume numbers, because they were one of the league leaders in attempts. And yeah, we talked pre-show again about how it's so often it seems like people need the actual designation, the pup designation or whatever it might be on TJ Hockenson to realize, oh yeah, he is hurt. He didn't magically recover in the last 2 days. But it does kind of seem like I agree with you there, that I don't know that it's properly being captured on what he could step into. And my bigger concern is, what does that offense look like holistically relative to his injury coming off of that?
Yeah, I know this range, like TJ Hockenson, people still, I feel good about getting like that's their tight end 1, but this range is where you're kind of gambling in a startup, where like yeah, you might be able to buy these players now and they're affordable, but let's say you're trying to build a roster, especially now that we're in redraft season and whatnot. I think it's pretty reflective across the board. Is that like the people who fade tight end, they're starting to pull like these guys, and this is where you're starting to look for your tight end too, so you feel pretty insulated. So it is kind of like a risk it for the biscuit, where it's like if you pass on Hockenson, you might be only getting a round or 2 discount for Pat Freiermuth and Jake Ferguson. So I know we talk a lot about Pat Freiermuth on here. We talked about him a lot last time we did tight ends. We don't talk enough about Jake Ferguson. Do you think he's still the second target in the Cowboys offense going forward? Or especially what we saw last year, do you think that like we saw him as a ceiling, or it's kind of like Jake Ferguson is Jake Ferguson. As long as he's a Cowboy, that's what we're going to get.
I believe last year was a ceiling year. I really do. And we did a buy, sell, hold article with the Dynasty staff and kind of just threw it out there. And so I moderated that, and I threw out Jake Ferguson, Evan Engram, and David Njoku kind of as your buy, sell, hold between the 3 of those players. And for me, Jake Ferguson was a sell, because I think that we saw his ceiling. I think that over the second half of last year, really from week 5 on, Brandon Cooks stepped up within that offense. And I think Brandon Cooks is going to be a significant portion of that offense. And then Luke Schoonmaker is kind of lingering out there. And maybe Ferguson did separate himself from Schoonmaker, but Schoonmaker was hurt last year, kind of rolling off that rookie season. We know that tight end takes a little bit more time to develop. I mean, there's a real scenario where they're either playing a lot more 12 personnel, or he's giving up snaps to Schoonmaker, and what's that tight end room going to look like? And I think long term, I would expect that they're going to use a first or second round pick or sign a significant free agent at wide receiver. I really just don't see a long-term outcome where Jake Ferguson is the number 2 target in the Dallas Cowboys offense. And we kind of saw him be the number 2 target in that offense last year. And what happened? He was still kind of a tight end 1 back end type. It wasn't like he was tight end 2 last year. He was still kind of back end tight end 1. And so that's where I don't know that the value on Ferguson holds out relative to maybe what you might be seeing at a ceiling right now.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I'll take him in redraft as a tight end too. In Dynasty, I have very little interest in him. Like maybe eh, right now, a lot of my rosters, I'm pretty good at tight end because of how I made my moves. But he's not someone I'm really looking to acquire because, like you said, I don't. Is he Dalton Schultz? He could be, where he can go to another team and still kind of hold his value. But I don't think he's good enough to really make that bet. And Dallas does seem to have this I guess like system of tight ends right now where they got like these pretty okay to mid tight ends that work within their offense and they'll be able to eat. So I don't, I really don't think that he's going to be someone that they're willing to pay because I mean they're not willing to pay Dak or CD. So I don't know, maybe they're willing to go cheap. I'm unsure, but he's definitely not someone I'm willing to roster. I've talked a little bit about David Njoku. I don't own any, and I sold most of them to either upgrade. I'd rather go get Engram or go get Kittle or something like that than stay put with Njoku on there because I just don't believe in the Browns and I don't know what they're going to be a next season. So we'll move to tier 5, and this is where it gets interesting because we have Ben Sinnott, and then we have Dallas Goedert and Isiaiah Likely. And it's interesting. They're 3 different kinds of players. Whereas like Ben Sinnott, if you have a hope for a rookie to be a Sam LaPorta, it's him, and then you got Dallas Goedert, who is a borderline handcuff, and Isiaiah Likely, who is a handcuff. Which one of these guys do you think can make the leap next year? There's a lot of buzz about Isiaiah Likely getting more usage, but I feel like anyone in Baltimore is getting usage at this point. Rashad Bateman, we got reports about with, so it's hard to tell. Dallas Goedert, I think, is easily the odd man out, but my concerns about Ben Sinnott. Do you think he can have a decent season? Let's say not LaPorta, but let's say a little bit less than like a Dalton Kincaid season, even with Jaden Daniels and that crowded receiving core?
Well, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about holistically, what you're seeing, I think you're seeing a lot more willingness to explore bully tight end type builds, and especially in tight end premium leagues. I think that, and so traditionally, the way tight end kind of played out was there was the top 12, and if you didn't take one of the top 10, okay, maybe you could wait on 11, 12 and still get a guy. But I think that you're starting to see now dynasty players more willing to explore bully tight end, or making sure that they buy an upside like Ben Sinnott or Isiaiah Likely if they've already got an elite tight end, and kind of look to double down there. And so it's interesting that I think that you're seeing a little bit of market factors that are changing in that direction. And because of tight end premium, because some of the breakouts between LaPorta and some of the volume that Trey McBride was able to enjoy at the end of last year, I'm still kind of I'm an Isiaiah Likely apologist now at this point. I'm a firm believer that I think that they are going to play 2 tight ends in their regular sets, and they're going to be using him and Mark Andrews. And so it's the highest end offense. I mean, maybe push pull between that and the Eagles. Dallas Goedert, to me, it seems like just has been phased out, and maybe it's been injuries, but maybe it's just been the arrival of AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts not really needing Dallas Goedert at that level, or the way that they hyper target the receivers in that offense. And so I think with Goedert, you're living a little bit more off name value than maybe the production that you're really going to get there. And I think you hit it right. You mentioned Ben Sinnott being kind of a dart throw if you want to make that bet. And I like his value a lot more in startups than I did in rookie drafts. There are people,
Yep.
you would always get somebody in like towards the back half of round 2 that was the Ben Sinnott guy, or was just the guy that was so desperate at tight end that they were willing to take Sinnott there when there's other strong wide receivers or running back prospects still on the board. In startups, it seems like he's moved to the back end of those types of players and he's kind of lingering out there. And it's interesting. Like, I've been grabbing him in underdog. I don't really know. Like, tell me, am I missing some bad news about Sinnott? Because now I'm starting to see tweets about Zach Ertz and like from not from beat writers, but like from fantasy people. And to me, it seems like maybe there was a little bit of Sinnott fever around rookie draft season, and now it's just kind of cooled off. And I'm willing to buy the way that it seems to me that the temperature is moving on him.
Yeah, and you nailed it. And again, it's interesting. This is why Dynasty's fun. Is like you have like 3 levels of value with rookies. You got trade, startup, and rookie draft. Rookie draft, you got way too expensive because, like you said, you nailed it. You've had the people that were so desperate, and especially in these tight end premium leagues, that you have to take them a little bit earlier, or you have someone that was just like he's the next LaPorta. We ride at dawn and I'm going to take him no matter what. So he got out of hand for me. But like you said, in a startup, you could arguably get him as a tight end 3, especially like you mentioned, being a bully tight end. He's a perfect bully tight end 3 target. And I guess when it comes from the fantasy community, I think a lot of people, they had the rookie fever. Now people are kind of doing projections, sitting down, and a lot of the luster is falling. A lot of the luster has went away, and people will realize that Cliff Kingsbury is willing to play Zach Ertz over other players, like he really is, and especially in camp, and especially with something like the tight end position, these guys who have played in the system tend to look better than the guys who don't know the system. So this is how we get in trouble making bad bets. Like Zach Ertz is like a Hayden Hurst type bet, whereas Ben Sinnott, even if, especially in a startup, even if you don't get the value that he drafted him for, the likelihood for him to recoup that value is like 10 times of that of Zach Ertz. Whereas Zach Ertz might give you a game or two, but he's going to lose that value, and he's only getting closer to retirement every day. Isiaiah Likely is interesting because I definitely think the writing's on the wall to where he's going to be the third target. It'll be Bateman, Andrews, or it'll be Flowers and Mark Andrews, and then Bateman and Isiaiah Likely might switch off who's going to eat. And like these dart throws that were taken on Devontae Walker or Nelson Aguilar aren't going to matter as much because Isiaiah Likely is just too good to keep off the field. And then if you have 2 good tight ends, that just gives you a little bit more flexibility. So I agree there. And then hit on Goedert. It's like you said, Goddard's only been useful when A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith has been out. That's why he's been a handcuff, and he hasn't been a particularly healthy one at that. With that being said, we'll go ahead and finish off with our tier 6. And we have Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave, Michael Mayer, and Tyler Conklin. Dalton Schultz, he's Isiaiah Likely, except he's not athletic and not as fun and probably just not as good as a player. If you think about the 4th option, that might have a spike week. We've crapped on Cole Kmet enough. Michael Mayer is what's interesting because when there's a clear discrepancy in our rankings, you have Michael Mayer a lot higher. Uh, Talk to me there, because if I had concerns about Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer's basically just dead to me, and it's hard for me to see the volume for them to replicate, let's say, what we think that the Ravens are going to do with their 2 tight ends.
I mean, he's a bet on a prospect profile that I still think he's a very good football player, and maybe he's stuck as the inline tight end. He just never sees any sort of volume. Or again, what's going to happen with Devontae Adams in the future? Is Jacoby Myers the type that's going to dominate target share? Should Devontae Adams not be there, or does this offense turn into one that, because of the the kind of the emergence of Bowers, that makes them look at the tight end position harder? And really, to put him, I've got him as my tight end 16 relative to some of the other players. And I think it's just betting on talent more than anything, probably, and just saying this is a young player at a position that it takes time to develop. I mean, you look at a year ago, what were people doing with Trey McBride? I mean, people
Yeah.
were done. People were writing Trey McBride off, and so that's where Mayer's kind of falling into there. It's just a bet that I'm willing to make, and we've done 3 startups together over the last month or so, and I think that I took Mayer in all 3, and it was really because he's sitting there in like round 17 when people are grabbing third string running backs and random dart throw wide receivers. And yeah, I'm going to take a bet on a tight end that went top 40 in the draft just a year ago and hope that there's something there.
Yeah, you're more, you believe a little bit more than me. It's hard for me to see it, but I didn't like him enough as a prospect. Like I thought, you want to talk about a Dalton Schultz? I thought Michael Mayer at best was a Dalton Schultz, which is pretty good for like what you're saying, but like I just don't think in this environment that he's someone that I'm willing to rank that highly or anything. I'm not saying I wouldn't roster him or I think he's dust. After talking to Coop from last episode, I'm wanting to move Luke Musgrave up a little bit and just bet on that upside. Tucker Craft, and again, the Packers are crazy. This team, every asset is fine at price, all the way from Jaden Reed down to Bo Melton. I'm okay with at price, which means like, could I arguably complete a super stack of Packers? You probably could. It's realistic that you can, and it's hard to say that we've ever had a team like that. As someone else who's become a favorite of mine, and that's because of you, is Tyler Conklin. If I liked Hunter Henry, I like these other guys. Why wouldn't I like Tyler Conklin? And I feel like it's finally his turn. We saw a little bit in Minnesota. We saw a little bit when he was a Jet. It's just all on Aaron Rodgers, and especially as a tight end 3, or if you, he's been my target if I've missed out on Pat Freiermuth. To be honest, if I missed Pat Freiermuth, I was like, okay, let me try to double dip and get Ben Sinnott and Tyler Conklin. I feel like I've hedged my bet. So seems like you should write a profile.
40. He's tight end 40. Like, I don't like, what are you doing? He's tight end 40 on keep trade cut. Like, come on, people.
He's he's put up low end tight end 1 numbers and has been
Yeah.
a target hog. And again, like all the things that we've said about Garrett Wilson can be applied to Tyler Conklin, arguably.
Well, it's like Hunter Henry. Like, people want to
Yeah.
buy Hunter Henry, and it's okay. Well, it's like the same thing, but he's got Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback and not
Yeah.
Jacoby Brissett. Like, what are you doing?
Or Drake May. Don't.
Yeah. Well, I hopefully there's a
Yeah.
fun Patriots and then there's a not fun Patriots, and hopefully we get the fun Patriots. But I feel like the Patriots are going to give us the not fun version. So
Yeah, you're right. With that being said, before we turn into a Patriots episode, we just did a shorty this week, guys. It's a little shorty with the tight ends. That'll be the show. Make sure to like and subscribe. Go check out our wide receiver tiers episode that we dropped this week with Theo Grebinger. And make sure to go to footballguys.com so you can check out all of Jeff's articles. As always, I am Jagger May, and then Jeff Bell was with me most times unless he's on vacation. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers.